August, 1968. Japan is sweltering through the hottest days of the summer. Rainstorms make the humidity go away, but not for long. This summer, like countless others before it, is muggy and harsh. In Tokyo's Electrotechnical Laboratory, a research team spearheaded by Noriko Umeda is putting the finishing touches on their newest project. A paper detailing the process is drafted almost as soon as it's complete. Titled Synthesis of Fairy Tales Using an Analog Tract, Umeda and her team have created the world's first text-to-speech program. Written in PL1 and running on an IBM 360, Umeda's analog tract debuted to the world at the 6th International Congress on Acoustics, and it read to the audience.
Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who had no children. Not a day passed that the queen did not say, "If only we had a child." One day, as the queen was walking beside the river, a little fish lifted its head out of the water.
Umeda noted in their paper that the resulting speech of the program was satisfactory, but not perfect. Now 83 sound codes are prepared in our programming system. This is the minimal number for synthesizing English speech. Because of the simplicity of the rules and from a practical viewpoint, 83 is considered to be a satisfactorily efficient number. For the International Congress on Acoustics, this was good enough. In 1968, having a program that could translate raw text inputs into speech was an entirely novel piece of tech. But it didn't sound like a human. Not yet, at least. Once Umeda's team had published their findings, the groundwork for future text-to-speech projects had been laid. Given enough time, money, and research, making something that could perfectly imitate a human's voice in real time was almost an inevitability. But as time went on, and computers became more powerful, more complex, the goal was no longer to imitate a human. It was to imitate any human. Text-to-speech systems are much more commonplace now than they were 50 years ago. What was once relegated almost exclusively to top-of-the-line computers can now be found on any cell phone. Umeda's team had laid the foundations for other researchers and companies, and a glut of new TTS technology followed in their wake. Of these, quite a few text-to-speech systems found some notoriety. The late Stephen Hawking, known for his work in theoretical physics and cosmology, famously used text-to-speech as his primary mode of communication. Hawking lived with Lou Gehrig's disease for over 5 decades, which rendered him unable to speak clearly. Using a small computer attached to his wheelchair, he was able to speak through a TTS program called Equalizer as early as 1986, which he used until his death over 30 years later. Other notable text-to-speech programs, such as Microsoft Sam,
Hello,
and that one British voice that reads off the Reddit posts,
Hi,
would gradually trickle their way into the mainstream. Still, though, most applications of TTS were either limited to a legacy of one-off memes or overused tools. There's only so many times you can make the Rafflecopter sound before it stops being funny. The following decade saw the rise of easy online video hosting, specifically on sites such as Newgrounds and Albino Black Sheep for Flash animations, and YouTube and Vimeo for everything else. With this rise came a new application of text-to-speech: artistic flair. As more and more small artists were given easier access to posting their videos online, the desire to add voices continued to grow. Some artists were more than content with finding voice actors online or doing it themselves. Others saw text-to-speech as a quick and cheap solution. What was especially interesting, though, were those who used text-to-speech to create a tone. Series such as Arby and the Chief, What If the Emperor Had a TTS, The Walton Files, and Faith have all used text-to-speech for their own artistic purposes. While they tend to vary pretty wildly between genres, each project uses text-to-speech for the express purpose of developing upon their established moods, rather than as a means of cutting corners in the voice acting department. For those who wanted text-to-speech to replace human actors, though, there were still 2 massive hurdles. Computers, for one, struggled for a long time to detect emotions. A process known as sentiment analysis had been around as early as the 1950s, primarily used to interpret customer surveys and opinions in order for companies to better meet the needs of their buyers. This process, however, was done manually, on paper. Until the mid-2000s, using machine learning for sentiment analysis was something that hadn't been done before. The field swiftly evolved, however. Countless companies and data miners saw the potential profits in automating the analysis of millions of social media and forum posts without needing to lift a finger. With every passing year, sentiment analysis has gotten progressively more accurate, though most processes still struggle to recognize subtext such as sarcasm or inside jokes. Text-to-speech developers adopted sentiment analysis in their own programs, gradually allowing their computerized voices to take more informed guesses as to how a particular line ought to sound. Something that was clearly written to be angry shouldn't be read in a happy tone. The other, much bigger hurdle remained. Text-to-speech voices have historically never sounded like real people. Human beings are very, very complex creatures, and a binary computer has a lot of difficulty in replicating one. While technology has made massive leaps over the decades, there's still a significant degree of difficulty in the spontaneous, convincing generation of human traits. People are made of meat, not ones and zeros, and mimicking the former through the latter is hard. A convincing human voice would need to emulate the length and thickness of the vocal cords, the various folds and creases of the throat, the amount of air forced from the lungs with each syllable, the movement of the tongue, the position of the teeth, and that all comes before subjective factors like timbre and prosody. In our day-to-day lives, this is something that we would never actively be thinking about, but for a computer to create its own voice, it would need to both observe and track each of these countless points of data. Instead, what engineers found was a much simpler solution. Rather than generate brand new voices, why not give computers real, human voices? But first, a disclaimer. While this script was being written, 15.ai came back on September 28, 2021 after a roughly 6-month downtime and brought with it new terms of service. The new TOS agreement states that, quote, "You must not use 15.ai voices with any other TTS voices within your project. This project is not merely a tool for you to haphazardly slap together voices just for your own benefit. My research is foremost, and I would like to avoid any chance of confusion of which TTS service created which voice, especially among those that are of far worse quality. In other words, if you use 15.ai for your video or project, you may not use any other TTS service for any other portion of that video or project." While discussion of 15.ai's influence on the current public perception of text-to-speech is necessary, I believe that the historical and comparative value of other text-to-speech services is non-negotiable for a video such as this. As such, to respect the creator's wishes while also preserving my own intent, none of the voices presented in this video will be sourced from 15.ai, though the project itself will be discussed. 15.ai, actual name Deep Throat, is a text-to-speech tool that was released in March of 2020, immediately taking the internet by storm. While speech synthesis isn't typically something that catches the attention of anyone who isn't a researcher, 15.ai's gimmick revolved around letting site viewers make their favorite characters say whatever they wanted. This, of course, wasn't the primary goal of the project, but it was what drew a significant amount of traffic. Hearing your Google Assistant read off map data is useful, but hearing SpongeBob SquarePants rap Baby Keem songs is memeable.
You gotta relax, the city where nobody sleeps, just tap in and ask where math, ho!
The project, authored by an individual known only as 15, aimed to set itself apart from similar tools in a few key ways. For one, 15.ai's deep learning algorithms were intentionally trained on a very limited amount of data. A 15-second sample is all that's needed to replicate a voice, hence the name. The Deep Throat model is also designed for the purpose of being the most accurate, prioritizing file quality and correct pronunciation. What isn't listed anywhere on the website's several explainer pages, however, was by far its biggest draw: accessibility. Until 15.ai came along, there really wasn't anything that had captured the attention of the public. Sure, it wasn't the first to do it. Anyone could train their own AI voice model on whatever characters they wanted to, but if you think that most people would ever even think to try that, then you don't know how familiar the average person is with a computer. Nearly every other TTS at the time was the same stiff, stilted sound it had been for the past 40 years. All it took to use 15.ai was a text box and a button. It just worked, and that was all it took to open the floodgates. People got busy. It's hard to overstate just how quickly content was being pumped out. Videos, songs, audio dramas, movie parodies, Team Fortress 2 animations. Holy shit, there were so many TF2 animations. If you were in a fandom that had a character's voice in 15.ai, it was inescapable. The first few weeks of hype turned into months, and the momentum seemed like it was just going to keep pushing it further and further into public perception. Everyone got a chance to have their fun, and most people behaved themselves. Most people. Some didn't. Some really didn't. But most people didn't do anything bad with it, and for a while, it was an internet darling. In its current state, 15 claims the website to be the result of over 4 years of hard work, mostly spent on solo development and maintenance. But if there's one thing the internet doesn't care about, it's hard work. At its most nebulous state, the internet at large really only cares if you can provide it with 2 things: novelty and ease of access. 15.ai mostly has the first. Making your favorite characters say all kinds of weird things is still fun, but it is historically not an easy website to use. In the past, it's seen long, unscheduled outages, sometimes for several months at a time. By the end of 2021, 15.ai spent more of the year offline than live. This forced content creators who rely on 15.ai to turn elsewhere for their TTS voice needs, often to competing websites such as UberDuck. While many of the voices on UberDuck sound drastically worse, regularly robotic and pitchy, the website has novelty and accessibility in spades. There are more voices, from more characters, from more franchises. It's novel to bounce from Team Fortress characters to Eminem to Rap Boy Genius without leaving the page. UberDuck, as far as I'm aware, hasn't been down for any meaningful amount of time, and all you need to do to get your voice clips is sign up for a free account. While that already may be a big ask for some, there are more than enough people willing to look past the registration requirements. For them, crackly voices and signups don't hurt their enjoyment.
These voices are so rudimentary that I can't even pronounce Scanning Matrogrino, the name of the actor that this AI was trained on.
It's good enough. A concession that 15 clearly has no interest in making. Can't say I know what that feels like. Of course, it wasn't all just fun and games. AI being able to convincingly replicate real voice actors is a very new field, and as with all new fields, it tends to raise a lot of questions and concerns. One of the first questions that might come to mind: what's the legality of this? Copyright law, especially in the United States, tends to be incredibly strict, and has remained a major target for lobbying by large corporations that don't want their work in the public domain. Whether it be music, videos, games, whatever, reproduction and redistribution of these materials by individuals tends to be heavily regulated, if not outright made illegal. Since these voices tend to be a part of TV shows or video games, one might expect that they would be owned and regulated in the same way as said TV shows and games as a whole. But it's never that simple. Who owns these voice clips is something that might seem obvious. The companies who make these works also own nearly every other asset, so why not the voices too? But it's something that needs to be made very explicit in contracts. One of the most infamous examples of this comes from Silent Hill 2, when Konami was getting ready to send out the HD re-release. As it turned out, they hadn't actually gotten the original actors to sign away their ownership rights during the development of the original game. This meant that, in order to include them in the HD re-release, Konami would have to reach back out to either pay royalties or a release fee, depending on what the actors were willing to agree to. Instead, Konami opted to hire brand new actors and fully replace all of the original performances. Fans revolted, demanding to hear the original voices. Industry veterans Troy Baker and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn were brought in by Konami as replacements for the original actors, and both were adamant that the actors of the original Silent Hill 2 didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Voice actors owning their own lines rather than signing the rights away is fairly uncommon. However, the original actors were eventually able to prove Konami's lack of ownership, and the company was forced to pay them out to get the rights to their voices back. Perhaps wanting to avoid a similar legal nightmare, Konami did not attempt to include the original actors of Silent Hill 3 in the HD re-release of that game. Of course, even assuming that large businesses aren't the ones issuing these takedown notices, individuals can still present a serious threat to companies that use their voices in the form of text-to-speech. Voice actress Bev Standing won a settlement against TikTok after they had allegedly used her voice for their text-to-speech without permission or attribution. Bev Standing had previously worked on an English e-learning course for the Chinese market, and her lawyer believed that TikTok had somehow gained access to and then trained an AI on Standing's voice clips. Despite never making any official comment on the matter, TikTok hastily changed the sound of their text-to-speech just 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, and they settled for an undisclosed sum after just 5 months. Rights and distribution are a double-edged sword, however. Many voice actors who have signed their rights away may very well have become unwitting contributors to text-to-speech development, with little to no recourse available to them in the event they want to put a stop to it. Large datasets intended for training AIs, or corpora, are the foundations on which these TTS systems are built upon. A speech corpus is used to get the sounds of the voice, while a text corpus is used to associate words with the phonemes that make them up. LibriVox and the associated Project Gutenberg provide both, respectively. LibriVox is a website for volunteer narrators to read texts from the public domain, many of which are often sourced from Project Gutenberg's collection of free ebooks. While works from the public domain can be monetized, this isn't the objective of LibriVox's contributors. The narrators submit their work with both the understanding and consent that their audiobooks are, like the text they read, wholly in the public domain. This means that their works are able to be downloaded, distributed, and transformed freely, without credit, by individuals and corporations. See, producing a data corpus tends to be difficult. Finding public domain text isn't all that hard, but speech tends to be a real sticking point. While sites like 15.ai and UberDuck are content with sourcing the sound of their voices from copyrighted media, larger companies tend to exert more caution. Harvesting voice samples from works not in the public domain is a potential legal pitfall. With this in mind, Google opted to source their speech corpora from LibriVox. Tacotron 2, Google's flagship text-to-speech system, has been the subject of nearly 24 research papers in the past 4 years since its announcement, but one in particular demonstrated just how powerful the technology really is. Transfer learning from speaker verification to multi-speaker text-to-speech synthesis, published in June of 2018, uses the LibriSpeech corpus to surprising effect. Tacotron is able to replicate a voice from just 5 seconds of reference data. The LibriSpeech corpus as a whole, for comparison, is 1,000 hours long. Tacotron only needs a 10,000th of a percent of that to start mimicking voices. Take a listen to some of the results.
Words are framed to express a level of thought which is by no means primitive. His motives were more pragmatic and political.
They left him then, for the jailer arrived to unlock the door and escort them to the office.
There were many editions of these works still being used in the 19th century.
Take a look at these pages for Crooked Creek Drive. Here is some information about the Gospel of John.
So, the first and third samples were humans, all the rest were AI. Real people are in blue, Tacotron is in orange. Sorry for pulling that trick at the end there, but I wanted to make sure that you were paying attention. Anyway, the people who contributed to LibriVox probably never did so anticipating that they would be transformed into text-to-speech voices. They worked on creating free, easily accessible audiobooks for anyone to listen to. They're people. Normal, everyday people with names and lives from all over the globe. But Google has reduced them down to a number, an ID. Despite the fact that this project wouldn't function without these sampled narrators, they'll never see so much as a shred of acknowledgement for their contribution. Because this has never been about the people behind these voices. It's about using them to make a convincing sounding machine. At the end of it all, the big question: will AI replace voice actors? Probably not. At the very least, not yet. Don't get me wrong, it's not impossible, but It's a very cynical idea that the creatives in charge of these projects will base their entire set of ideals around what maximizes profit. See, until we reach some magical point in the future where art is being made by machines without any human input, there's always going to be an emotional factor. People, especially artists, usually have goals and ambitions beyond whatever's the most economically viable action. Sure, an AI actor might be cheaper, but beyond the initial novelty, who would want one in the long term? Actors are front-facing members of any project. They aren't any more or less important than anyone else on the team, but they are the ones who are going to get most of the recognition. We bond easier with the actors we can put a voice to, rather than the map designers or boom mic operators whose work is less immediately easy to identify. Ask the average person who the singer from Queen was, and they'll pick out Freddie Mercury. Ask them who produced most of Queen's best albums so the masses could actually listen to them, and, well, good luck. It was Mike Stone. Anyway, it's because actors are front-facing that the appeal of an AI voice immediately wanes. Actors sell. Large studios with the budget to spare will go out of their way to hire big-ticket voice actors and even get celebrities involved with their projects. There's a few reasons for this. Showing off that you can get these huge names involved with you adds legitimacy. Fans of that actor might be interested in checking out the project said actor is working on, and you know that they're probably going to give you a pretty good performance considering the amount of attention and money they command. It's a safe, marketable strategy, and the only downside for the studio is the price. But considering how inflated budgets have gotten across pretty much every form of media, the cost of hiring these big-name actors is a tiny drop in a much larger bucket. Besides, what could be more efficient than getting your actors to double as your marketing team?
Starring some very familiar names. Troy and Roger in person.
They didn't waste any resources on the performance for sure.
So cool to see an independent studio doing this, teaming up with you guys. We can't wait to see more. And we've got your first listen to the English voice cast. Dwayne Johnson,
Serge Tankian,
David Arquette, and an all-star cast.
Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson.
Surprise!
Troy's back again.
Well, you might ask, what about independent developers and animators and what have you who can't afford these big voices? Couldn't they use AI actors? And sure, they could, but again, why would they? For a lot of indie creators making their first serious projects, it's the first chance they'll get to direct people. That's a big step for a creator. Coming up with a style guide for artists, hunting down or composing the perfect music tracks, and yes, directing actors. It's also usually a step that doesn't leave much room for compromise. Anyone relying on free AI voices likely wasn't planning on hiring actors in the first place. How many people generating AI art would have paid hundreds of dollars to get their concepts commissioned? How many people who use stock music would have paid thousands for licensing fees? These act as alternatives to nothing, not as alternatives to professionals. Attempts at monetizing AI voices have failed miserably. Of particular note were voiceverse NFTs. Their primary selling point was the replication of specific celebrities or otherwise notable voice actors, and they were exposed for stealing lines from 15.ai within a week. The TTS they use now are the same stock robotic voices we've heard for decades. And the entire concept was viciously mocked by almost every voice actor whose name isn't Charlotte Chung or Troy Baker. God, his name just keeps coming up in this video.
Troy's back again.
It all comes back to novelty. In the public eye, AI voices might already be passé. Searches relating to these TTS services are down across the board, long having since peaked back in July of 2021. There have been rumblings of more companies trying to adopt these AI voices. Amazon's Alexa is supposed to be able to replicate the voices of your dead relatives soon. But there hasn't been much besides ideas getting floated around. And ideas don't present people with the novelty they crave. Thinking really hard about something is one thing. Execution is another entirely. All of these projects live and die and thrive on attention. Having an audience can secure funding. Showing potential for a revenue stream can attract investors. If people wind up getting bored of the idea, the market share shrinks. It shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until it withers and falls off the branch and dies. Once the general public no longer cares, your niche cannot evolve far beyond where it already is. AI voices, right now, serve as screen readers and automated phone receptionists. As the interest in anything more dies out, this is how they'll remain. Developments are happening fast, and a few years might be all it takes to prove that I'm the same kind of Luddite who thought horses would never be replaced by cars. But I can't see AI replacing human actors anytime in the foreseeable future. As far as I'm aware, AI voices are going to stand alongside the fusion reactor and self-driving cars, things that are perpetually 20 years away from being ready. A lot of these big-name actors can't even feasibly be replaced with TTS. SAG-AFTRA's 2022 dubbing clause explicitly forbids union projects from ever using recordings collected during a session to develop AI voices. This automatically excludes nearly every single name on this list from ever legally having their work sampled, which immediately shrinks the potential TTS talent pool down to raw computer generation and non-union, small-name actors. The strongest proof I have, though, is just to follow the motivations of the people developing this technology. 15 wants to be the best. UberDuck wants to sell site memberships. Google wants to sell computer interfacing tools. Amazon wants to sell Alexas. And both of the latter two companies want to normalize the ever-increasing scope of data that can be harvested from you. At what point, during any of that, is anyone trying to replace voice actors? AI voices, as they stand, are far too impractical to be adopted anytime soon. Imagine being a director and being told to use text-to-speech actors. Even with the advent of sentiment analysis, it can be hard to make an AI voice give the delivery that you want. There's a lot of tweaking that needs to be done just to get a consistent pattern of emphasis and pronunciation. That doesn't at all account for the random variance baked into non-deterministic models which ensure that no two reads sound identical. It takes a lot of time to make those generations, and each one is going to cost you. You need to do this manually, for every single line, for every single actor, for the entire script. You could do all of that, on top of the rest of your directorial duties. Or, you could just hire an actor. Hi everyone, it's been a while. I've tried to record this a few times now, but I can't seem to find the words, so I'm just gonna ramble for a bit, so forgive me for padding the runtime. Thank you so much for waiting. I know it's been a long time, way longer than it has any right to be since this video was supposed to come out. There's reasons for it. This is the end result of 2 long-running scripts that I had to scrap, and then this took a lot of research and effort, and ultimately it was the victim of me getting burnout and not really wanting to finish it. But here it is in all of its glory, for all of the stalling and time I've wasted to get this out to you. I will try with everything I have to not let this happen again, but I said that before, so, you know, at this point, who knows? Maybe I'm just a pathological liar about these things. But it's out, and thank you so much to all of the Patreon subscribers who stuck with it through 2 years of nothing, to everyone who has watched this far at all. It really does mean a lot that even though my upload schedule has, you know, basically dried up, and a lot of the viewers who were here aren't anymore, it really does mean a lot that you've stuck with it for this long, so thank you. I don't know where it's gonna go from here. Hopefully it'll be better, more efficient, more frequent. But until then, I guess we'll just have to wait and see to find out. So, thank you. And, you know, happy holidays. This should be going up on the 24th, so happy holidays to everyone who's celebrating, and good luck in the new year, both to you and to me.